Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my stream. And I've set up a little moodiness here tonight in the studio for the things I'm going to be talking about tonight. And this would be the night to have callers, but I'm not set up quite yet to take callers. That will be after I start the Intrepid radio program on Odyssey Network, which is a national syndicated network where my show will begin as the Intrepid radio program on the 19th, Monday, the 19th of this month, which is about 10 days away. So prepare yourselves for that. That's coming. I want to thank you all for being here. So I hear that Jeff is doing a little ranting, Jeff Dougherty over on his channel, The Christian Whistleblower, one of my colleagues, and he does do his own thing. I got to tell you, I had a lot to rant about politically today, but I didn't want to do that tonight. I'm going to do some of that tonight with Rocky right after this show at 11 o'clock. So just a hair under 2 hours from now, join Rocky and me live on Rocky Stucci's Situation Room. And we're going to talk about a lot of this stuff. I've still got, if we're doing the Consequential Rapscallions tomorrow night, Thursday night, that would be Jeffrey Dougherty and I over on his channel. We haven't done it for a few weeks because there's been a lot of things that have conflicted with that, but we may be doing it tomorrow. We'll find out. There is plenty to rant about. I am going to tell you this. One of the things I have noticed since the shootings over the weekend is the uptick in all the criticism from the left, with the old play words now being brought into a new playbook, which is declare Trump and all of his followers racists, white supremacists. I don't know if it's supremacists or supremacists. I think it's one or either. Supremacists. And that the problem in this country, the problem with the shootings, all took place because of Trump's rhetoric. Now, that is what the mainstream media and the left would now have you believing. Do you remember, folks, when we talked about King David and the apologetic that was written about him, probably ordered by him? One thing is very obvious when you come to an historical apologetic on a tale of an historical person, and that is the more they say something is so, to prove that it is so to the reader, to the follower, the more you can pretty much bank on the fact that they're covering something else up or they're creating a narrative over the top. Now, that's exactly what we have going on. It's not an apologetic in the United States today. It is a cold civil war. And these people will do whatever they can do to make the other party look bad. Remember in the King David series, part of the apologetic was not just making David look good, it was making Saul look bad. So the reader could accept what they were presenting about David. This is the same thing you see going on in the country right now. I mean, I just posted an article, I can't even pronounce the guy's last name, Figlioso or something like that. Came on to, I think it was MSNBC. You can go check my wall over on my Facebook page. I wasn't going to talk about that here, so I didn't bring the information with me, although it'd be easy to find it. And he said that he believes that Trump ordering the flags to be flown at half-mast starting tomorrow, the 8th of August, is actually Trump celebrating Adolf Hitler, because H is the 8th letter in the alphabet, and the 8 used to stand for Hitler, Heil Hitler, HH. And so he's saying that there's this great conspiracy going on, that what President Trump is actually doing is that he is, you know what, I got to call this up because I got to tell you about this before we get into our ghosty stories for tonight. Let me find it here. It's right here in my stuff. I believe it's this. Has it been removed from my page? Oh my goodness. Because I just posted this not very long ago, and now it is not on my page. How about that on my Facebook page? Let's see if it's there. Nope. I've got an editorial on the cleanup that Trumpers did in Baltimore. I have a music video I put up several hours ago today, and nothing in between, and nothing after except my announcement for tonight's show. So I'm going to tell you, somebody had that removed and complained and removed it. I'll find it again and I'll post it again. But what you've got with this guy is him coming on mainstream news. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. Hang on here, because I think this is important to say something about before we move on. It's not there. It's not there. I'm looking for something as we're talking. Let's see. And I think this is very important. Let's see. I'm going to put flags at half mast for Hitler. Let's see if the article is even still out there. Here it is. Now, this one is not the original article I posted. This is on Town Hall. This is the former FBI top brass. Trump's half-staff order is dog-whistling white supremacists. And a former FBI assistant director of counterintelligence spied a secret neo-Nazi signal in how President Donald Trump chose to mourn the victims of the shootings in Dayton, Ohio, and Austin, Texas. Frank Figliuzzi, it's probably two Z's, who is also an NBC News national security contributor, told MSNBC that the president might be dog whistling white supremacists by choosing to fly the national flag at half-staff until August 8th. As the former FBI official explained in the broadcast, the number 88 holds symbolic importance for white supremacists because the letter H is the eighth letter in the alphabet. Thus, 88 is a stand-in for HH, which in turn is an abbreviation of Heil Hitler. The president said that we would fly our flags at half-mast until August 8th. That's 88. August 8th, 88, Figliuzzi said. Now, I'm not going to imply that he did this deliberately, but I'm using this as an example of the ignorance of the adversary that is being demonstrated by the White House. And Figliuzzi vacillated between laying the blame for the supposed snafu on the president or his staffers. And while he said he was not going to imply that he did this deliberately, he raised worries that he's rejecting the advice from his staffers to choose a less controversial date. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I never knew that 88 stood for Heil Hitler. I always knew 88 is my older brother's birthday. My brother turns 60 on the 8th of this month. He's a year and a half older than I am. And that's tomorrow. And so 88 has never held any significance for me other than being the 8th of August. So now we're finding out that obviously Trump knew this and all his staffers knew this, and Trump was probably thumbing his nose at his staffers and allowed it to be done anyway. I rather doubt that. I'm going to say I doubt that. So Louis Boyce, hello. How you doing? Susie Q, how you doing? Leslie, how you doing? And Susie Q, nice to see you. April, nice to see you. Well, most of us are conspiracy theorists. That's true, April. And April, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in here live for a while. Doesn't mean you haven't been listening out there, but it's good to see you. Leslie, nice to see you. Audrey, always great to see Audrey. Terry, Electra, Fran, Melinda, good to see all of you. Jeannie, glad you're here. And let's see, anybody else I'm missing for now? Brianna, nice to see you. Effing serious, she says. I'm not sure what that was too. But if you're talking about what I was talking about, yeah, that's serious. So I don't know what Jeff was ranting about over there tonight, but if it's anything like that, I could go off for an hour and a half on the mainstream media and what they're doing right now. But tonight is not the night I chose to do that. Tonight, oh, Roger Rabbit, good to see you, brother. I did not want to get into politics right now. As you know, Rocky and I, we've said it every day. I've said it every day in here. I'm up to my eyeballs with politics. And that doesn't mean we won't be doing it. It just means there are times we need to press that release valve. For me, getting into some of this stuff I want to talk about tonight. Little scary stories, some spooky stuff. Some of these things you may have heard me talk about before, others you may not. Now, I've got a couple of clips I'm going to play of things as well. I am still not quite set up with the software to do this properly, so I'm going to move my mic when I play these throughout the show, and you're going to be hopefully be able to hear some things and as I get to some of those stories. So, if you saw the title for tonight's program, I called it Scotty's Anecdotal Tales of, I can't remember exactly how I worded it now. Scotty's Anecdotal Tales of Ghostly Stories and the Macabre or the Supernatural. And why I use the word anecdotal is because I learned a long time ago when talking to skeptics, when talking to the world that doesn't believe these things exist, that they want that every story you say, well, I might say my personal story, my personal experience trumps your skepticism because I was there. And I was told very early on, well, that's just anecdotal. That's your personal story. And you know what? They're right. If I were to take a skeptical approach, as all of us should when we hear stuff, we've got to be able to discern between what is the bullshit and what is the real thing. And because none of us were there except the person telling the tale, many times that story becomes simply anecdotal. It's my story or whoever's telling the tale. It's their story. They were the only ones there. Maybe they would say, and so was with me, and a couple of people around me saw this thing. I know a good friend of mine that's on here is Amanda B. I don't think she's here tonight, but she was here last night, and she's always on Jeff's show and the Situation Room. She sees UFOs. She's down in Australia. And she's generally the only one there when and she's had a lot of experiences. And she's even got in her own channel here on YouTube a lot of video and photos that she's taken of these things over the years. So Leslie says, Scott, you are oh so welcome. That must not be to me. I don't think I said anything. Oh, Scott Grimes. Good to see you, Scott Grimes. I almost stole your thunder. Lola Joy, good to see you too. And Topper, nice to have you here. Lewis, good to see you. And so anecdotal stories are just simply my own story. This is what happened. And by the way, for those of you freshly coming in, if the light looks low and I might look a little hazy, it's because the light is low and I look a little hazy. I wanted to atmosphere it up in here a little bit. Of course, when I raise my hands, the light hits it, so you get these big white flashes. But hopefully the atmosphere, I've got my little candle burning on Senenmut's face in the back. And so some of the stories I'm going to tell you, while they're all anecdotal, these are all things that happened to me. And I would hope that if you listen to my voice now, I may not have everything right all the time, but I incorporate what I like to call common sense. As Rocky and I have said as a tag for the show for years, we have said never smarter than common sense. I have had good friends of mine that are skeptics and atheists that will listen to some of my anecdotal stories and they will say, Scotty, it was late at night. You needed to see a ghost and all of that. And I will ask them point blank, as I will ask you as you listen to me tonight. Have you ever known me, I said to him, to be somebody who needs to see something happen? Have you ever known me to fly off the handle, to go way off the deep end, needing to see ghosts? I said, you've never known me to be that kind of person. I approach all of this stuff with a very healthy dose of my own skepticism. But I can tell you what happens to your skepticism when you are confronted with something physical or audible or something that is right in your presence? Your skepticism runs down your pant leg and out into your shoe and onto the floor for some people. I like to say there's not much that can scare me, but there's an awful lot that can startle me. I mean, my own son can do that. My 9-year-old son, he'll come up behind me and try to scare me. I usually hear him coming, but when I don't, and I turn around, and he's right there, and he goes, ah, and I go, ah, and I go, knock it off. I can be startled. Was I scared? No, I was startled. But I tell him, yeah, you scared me, son. You got me that time. So there are things. Now, I say that with a little bit of trepidation because, as with the tarot, there are things that hear you out there. There are things that pass on messages for you. I would think in that ghostly realm, that spirit realm, that other realm that maybe we don't know what we're encountering, we have no way to define it necessarily. That's where science could come in. Maybe somebody hears you and they go, ah, we'll get him really good that next time he's out in the dark or looking for something. We'll find a way to, we'll hover over his bed and make him pee his sheets at night, which could very well happen. I remember there was one incident, and now if some of you have heard some of these things I'm going to tell you, that's okay. Enjoy them again a second time. They don't get any different. I don't embellish them much more than I already have over the years. They're just my stories. And I lived in a house where I had a lot of activity. And I told some of those stories on here, from the rubber bands in the shoes, the handprints in the mist in the mirror, Rainy seeing something open and shut a door. This was a drawer in a when she was taking a shower at my house. We weren't even dating yet, and she was taking a shower at my house, and the drawer open and shut. We had some friends over, and I told you that story. I may hit some of those to highlight them again tonight, but that same house, there were things that happened in that house, and so many things that I had a good friend of mine, a woman that young woman that I used to date, and her mom used to come and hang out at my place. And they came after Rainey and I started seeing each other. They came over and they were doing a pendulum reading in my house. Now, if any of you know what a pendulum reading is, it's where you, almost like the tarot, or I'm sorry, a Ouija board, you write out the letters of the alphabet and different words and numbers and things like that in a circle, and you lay that on the floor of the tabletop, and on a little chain you hang a pendant that's a weight, and usually a nice crystal with a point on it, and you hold that still and you wait for that thing to start moving, and it will move and spell letters. Like, think of a Ouija board type of a situation. And many times that thing will be moving so fast it'll spell out whole names, sentences, things like that for you. And so she came over to do a little reading because at this house, there was one night that Rainey was staying over. We were camping out, and she woke up about 5 in the morning and told me later that day that she saw a little boy standing in the room, about the same age as my then 4-year-old son, Sam. So this is like 14 years ago, 15 years ago. And it wasn't Sam. She said he was wearing a black suit with a white collar and white cuffs and kind of darkish brown hair, and was just standing in the bedroom. And she saw him, and she said she just turned over toward me and went back to sleep. And I said, "Why didn't you wake me?" And she said, "I didn't want you to think I was being nutty." And because at this time we're still getting to know each other, and I was into this stuff. I was constantly doing this stuff, and she didn't know that quite that much about me yet, but she saw things. Rainey attracts them, and this is one of the things in that happened in that room. So I called my old friend, and her mom came over. They are, I believe, second and third generation witches, the real thing, witches, by the way. And they did the pendulum reading in the room, and we were all sat on the bed. I had a huge bedroom, probably, you know, 20 feet by 20 feet, and a big king size bed in the corner at a diagonal. And the room wasn't very furnished at that time, wooden floors. And we're sitting on this bed, and she did a pendulum reading. And she asked how many ghosts and spirits were in the house. And she got the answer that there were 4 spirits and 2 ghosts. Now, you might ask, what are the difference? Spirits are those that I see. I've heard a couple of different definition. I've always seen them as beings that have never had corporeal bodies. They've never been human beings. They are in that spirit realm. And then, of course, ghosts would be spirits or ghosts of people who have once lived and perhaps trapped on that plane. And so it said we have six in all, four spirits, two ghosts. And as she sat, she questioned and she said something about was trying to figure out. Now I'm going to back this story up. You remember I've mentioned before I used to have a gathering at my house every Thursday night. And I would have a lot of the people from the Renaissance Festival. My friends would come over. A lot of the belly dancers would come over that were friends of mine. Guys in Irish bands would come over. We'd play music and we'd do all kinds of stuff. And we'd end up with 20 to 30 people in my house every Thursday night till the wee hours. And this woman friend of mine, her mom, she walked in one night and she stopped at the doorway and she said, "There's a very female presence in your house." And she said it's almost like a jealous woman. She doesn't like the fact that there are other women in the house. And that particular night, I remember there was all kinds of festivities going on. There were probably already 20 people there. A good mix of women, a good mix of men. And she said she doesn't like when you have women. And of course, because I had dated her daughter, who had also come along, she had said, and I think it's because my daughter's here and some of the other people she mentioned. And so, well, I just left it at that. I said, that's very curious. And it was a couple of months later now that she is at our house and she's doing this pendulum reading. She wanted to find out about this little boy that Rainey had seen. And her daughter was actually helping me clean the house a few months earlier. And just for sake of clarity, I lived in the townhome next door. We bought the big house next door, and the day I moved, she came over and was helping me clean, and she saw the little boy in the broad daylight. And and we weren't looking for it. She was just up on a ladder on the top of the cabinets in the kitchen cleaning off, and I was down below, like cleaning the countertop. And she leaned over. She's looking out toward the living room, and she says, "Uh huh, uh huh," like that. And I looked up and I said, "What?" And she said, "I'll tell you later." And she told me about it. She saw the little boy. So all of this segues now back into the story. They're at the house. Her mom is doing the pendulum reading. And her mom says, "Does one of the ghosts, would you like to talk to me? There's somebody whose presence I feel here quite often. And are you a woman?" And it spelled out with the pendulum swinging. And it said, "Yes." And she said, "Could you give me your name?" And it spells out a full name. It spells out Tamara Barnhart. Now, if that name rings a bell to you, you may have heard this story before. So we're sitting there. Tamara Barnhart comes out, and I immediately get, how you get the chills that go up your back? I'm getting them right now. Backs of your arms. I got goosebumps just talking about this. I have never felt it was like severe. It was like pins and needles of cold all over my body, head to foot. And I went, "Whoa." I said, "Did you say Tamara Barnhart?" I said, "You don't know who Tamara Barnhart is in my life." And I relayed to her a story that now this happened in the winter of 2005 is when this is happening. And back in my high school days, when I was, we're talking 1977, 78, I dated a girl in high school named Tammy Barnhart. Her father was one of the seminary professors. We went to a big church, and I was in a big church high school. And we also had the seminary, and we had the radio station, owned the college I eventually attended on another place, in another premises. And so her dad was a seminary professor there, and I got to know her, and we started dating as 16 and 17-year-olds date. And I ended up going off to college. Her parents thought we were going to get married. I will say this: no detriment to anybody. No offense by They were from West Virginia, and I think her mom, they kind of had this feeling like, you're going to get married at 16. That's fantastic, And they were all in support of us. But what did we know at 16 and 17? For Pete's sake. So I ended up going off to college the next year, and Tammy was a year behind me in school, and so we just parted ways. We didn't break up. There was nothing bad, nothing like that. I just, hey, I love you. I'm going to go off to school. I'll see you when I come home on the weekends. We didn't even discuss relationship. That's how much of kids we were, teenagers we were. We weren't pining over, are we going to get married someday still? But, so I went off to school, and we just lost touch over the years. And later, several years later, I bumped into her at my church. They were visiting back home. She was married now, um, and I was married. And we talked in the narthex of the church and so on. And so more years passed, and I heard in 1990, I think it was 1992, I heard that she had died. That Tammy had died. She had severe diabetes when I knew her in high school. And apparently she was pregnant, and in childbirth, the diabetes just totally overtook her system, and she ended up she passed away from this. And I heard about that from some friends much later. And you get that stab in your heart, and you go, "Oh man, that's a shame." I think I even cried a little bit. I said, "This is somebody I cared for a great deal when I was a kid." I think back to that. You think back to high school romance, and that sticks in your head. And so when Kay was doing this pendulum reading and she got Tamara Barnhart, I had the pins and needles all over me. And Rainey was sitting on the bed next to me where we were doing all of this. And both of us kind of looked at each other, and between us, I swear to you, a little mist crossed right between us. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Rainey saw it. We weren't sitting in the dark, by the way. It was broad daylight outside. It was the middle of the afternoon. And Rainey looks at me and she goes, and I look at her, and we were both like, "You saw that?" And she said, "I saw that. Did you see that?" And it got very cold between us. It was almost as if at the time we described it as if somebody had come and sat down in between us, separating us. And so as we continued asking questions, I was asking questions of this Tamara and not getting very satisfactory answers. And so Kay told me, she said, it's either her and she doesn't remember these things, or it's somebody else. She said, but there is definitely this female presence. Now, Kay went on to tell me, you can ask about her. You can talk to her if you want, anytime. So let's move on. Next day, bright, shiny January day up here in Minnesota. There was 3 feet of snow on the ground. It was below zero, not a cloud in the sky, gorgeous, crisp blue sky, the sun shining off the snow, incredibly bright outside. All my drapes are open in the bedroom even. And I remember I'm all alone in the house. My kids are visiting their mother for the weekend. Rainey was away. And we weren't living together yet, so she wasn't there all the time. And I'm standing in the doorway to the bedroom, and I'm looking at that. I had this huge bed set at a diagonal, and there was about 8 to 10 feet of wood floor space between the doorway and the bed. And so I'm standing there in the broad daylight, and I say, I said, "Tammy, is that you? Are you the one who is here? Are you the one that Kay feels? Are you the jealous woman?" And now, mind you, this is 2005. So this would be about 14 years after she died. And I said, if it's really you that's in the house, I said, would you be willing to give me some sign? I said, don't come and hover over my bed at night because I'll pee my sheets. That's where that came from. I said, but if you could give me a sign right here now, I'd love to know if you're here. And right on the tail of my sentence, I'd barely gotten the words out. About halfway between me and the bed on the wooden floor, I hear just like that. Only it was more echoey. It sounded like somebody took a 5-pound steel mallet and hit the wood floor. And I jumped a little bit and I went, ha! I said, that'll do. and the first thing I did was I said, I need to go find out if there's anything in the house that could have caused that bang to be right there. And yeah, Delaney, it was even more than a tap. It was a astronomically, it was an astral bang like you wouldn't believe. Not an explosion. It was very isolated right there. And so I went downstairs underneath to see if there's pipes under there or something. It's a somewhat older house. And I went downstairs, and it was my daughter's bedroom was down there, my twin daughters. And on the ceiling was nothing. It was just sheetrocked. There weren't even air ducts there. The air ducts were over on the far end. And so there was nothing that could make the noise. As a matter of fact, all that was almost right below that spot was their ceiling fan. So, and the basement there was very finished. I mean, it was finished top notch. So it was like just another part of the house. Didn't even feel like a basement. So I went back up to my room and I said, okay. I said, if that's you, I appreciate that sign. And I said, you can talk to me anytime you'd like. Now, having said that, I didn't hear much more from anybody identifying themselves to me as Tammy. We had lots of experiences in that house, lots of little things. This is the house, if you remember some of my stories, where we had 3 cats at the time. I had a cat, Rainey had 2 cats, and by the time when she came and was living with me, she still owned a house in another part of town, but she came and pretty much was living with me. She brought her 2 cats, and we would find all 3 cats closed up in the bathroom. And if you remember this part of the story, if you've heard this, we'd go to open the door, and all the drawers on the vanity had been pulled out to block the door from opening. Now, some of this happened before the issue. No, it was after the issue with Tammy. There were other things that seemed to keep giving me indications that somebody was there. Somebody wanted my attention. Tammy wanted to use Rainey to feel your hot lovin'. Scotty, there it is, Delaney. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I will tell you, too, once before Rainey and I were dating, and all this interim period here, by the way, I had been divorced at this point for about, divorced in 2001. Rainey and I started dating in 2005, in August of 2005. And I was, as my now adult daughters will tell you, and I have no shame in passing this on. It's just my personal history, and it's a little funny. My daughters, now 27 years old, at the time, what was that? They were 13, 14 years old. They said I was a man whore during those days. And all I will say is that I was a typical guy. I had sole custody of my children, all 3 of my children, my then 13. In 2001, I was given sole custody of my then 10-year-old daughters and my 1-year-old son. They all came to live with me full time. So I was raising them on my own as a single dad. And their mom was very sporadic when she would see them. But so there were women in and out of the house is the thing. And there was part of this story in the middle that there was one day, and I got to tell you this. This, and I attribute it to this, it's either the ghost of Tammy or it's a spirit that somebody was displaying the jealous tendencies of a woman. Because anytime there was a woman, like within 10 feet of me in that house, there was activity of some kind that would take place or follow shortly thereafter. I had a time where I had in this big long house, I had my office set up in what was the breezeway of the house between the living room, kitchen, and the garage. And this huge breezeway. I had a huge oak desk in there, my computers and my drawing tables and stuff like that. And the staircase was on the backside that went downstairs to the kids' rooms. And there was a big like picture window with no glass in it that looked into the living room all the way to the far end of the house, of the upstairs. And the kitchen door was there. And I would sit there, and there was the patio door out back and the front door to my left. Now, I didn't have a key to the house. Somewhere along the way, when I took possession of the house, I lost the one key I was given to the house. So I always left it open. And I kept the front door always locked and the back door always open. You would have to lock it with the deadbolt to lock it. And there was no key on the outside to open it. And so all this is leading up to a story. And all this interim, when I had people, remember I told you, that would come to my house on Thursdays, I told all my friends, and I knew a lot of people from the festival days, I told them my house has an open door policy. If you're ever hungry, come to my house. There were a lot of people that really struggled, that worked out at the festival and entertainment and stuff like that, actors, and they didn't have a lot. I said, if you need a place to stay, my back door is always open. Something to eat. If you want a cup of coffee, my back door is always open. If I'm not there, my back door is always open for any of you to come if you need anything from me or just want to come and hang out. And I had some people that would take advantage of that in a good way. But there was one morning I went to coffee. A woman friend came, picked me up for coffee. We went out. And I came back to the house. I had her drop me at the end of my very long driveway. And I said, I'll see you in a while. See you later. Thanks for the coffee. And I walked back to my door, and it's deadbolted, which means it would have had to have been locked from the inside because there was no key. So I checked all around the house. There weren't any windows unlocked. All the windows were locked. So I had to finally crawl up on one of my deck chairs and crawl through the bathroom window, and I was able to jigger the lock. I had to pull the screen off. I ruined the screen frame getting in there, and I got into the house, and I was able to then go in and unlock the door. So that would happen. Now, you might be able to explain that away, except I had all kinds of little things like this that constantly happened. And this was when Kay was telling me, I feel like there's a jealous woman in the house. So here I go out to coffee with a woman, and I come back home and I'm locked out of my house and nobody's there for the weekend. So, I got locked out of the house. That happened only once. I had the rubber band incident where I had the young woman and her mom over, and I was looking for a rubber band, couldn't find any. I sent them home after dinner. They stayed till about midnight and went home. I was home alone in the house, and I kicked off my shoes at my desk and locked the. I didn't lock the back door. I'm sorry. Walked back to bed and went to bed. And I got up in the morning, and I'm always an early waker, so it was about midnight, 12:30. I went to bed, and I'm up at about 5 in the morning, and I walk back there and slip on my shoes, and I go, what the hell? And I look down, pull my shoes off. I'd been looking for the bag of rubber bands that had been in my drawer in my desk. I find 20 rubber bands stuffed up, tightly crammed up into the toes of my shoes. And that happened sometime between 12:30 at night and 5:30 in the morning. So little things I'm talking about. The cats being in the bathroom, drawers being opened on the vanity, little handprints appearing in the mirror, in the mist, in the bathroom. Too high for my 4-year-old son at the time to have put his handprints on there. All kinds, this list of things that were little things that happened into that house. Some of the things I forgot. I will tell you this too. The woman who had previously owned the house, she had an adult daughter who was a drug addict, amongst other things. And her bedroom was one of the bedrooms downstairs, not the one I put my daughters in, but there was a bedroom off the main room in the downstairs. And she had totally graffitied that bedroom. Everything imaginable you can think of. There were satanic symbols. There were all things like this. All kinds of graffiti all over that room. And so we kept that door shut and locked until we were going to refinish the wall there. We being me. And then I had a good friend of mine from the festival, one of the belly dancers, and she needed a roommate, a place to live. And I said, I got this room here. And I said, but come and look at it. And she came and looked at it with her friend. It was nice. It was a mirror of the upstairs. She had her own fireplace, and it was a big room, but it had red carpet and all this graffiti on the walls. And I said, if you want to stay here, I said, we've saged the house, we've cleansed it, and we can. And so we sat down there and got it all painted up, covered everything up, made it a really nice bedroom for her. And it was really a small apartment. Had a little kitchenette in it, if I remember correctly. But before we had done all that, we would sometimes find my cat. Where's the cat? Well, I'd hear thump and thump, 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 thump. And I'd go downstairs, and the cat is shut up in the locked graffiti room. And I open the door, the cat zips out and up the stairs and gone. Some other part of the house. So there were all kinds of things that happened in this house that led up to this thing with Tammy Barnhart. And I will tell you this, I'm going to jump way ahead. I've made mention, there's so many of these stories I've told and not told, and little anecdotal things now and then, because of the time I spent with the Ghost Hunters at their the editor-in-chief of their magazine, Taps Paramag. I met a lot of people, and I would have a lot of psychics and mediums that would just contact me online. I'd love to do a reading for you, Scotty. And I said, okay, let's do it. And I've had more than one person. This was just about 4 or 5 years ago. I had somebody named, I think it's Adele. It's not Adele. She's a psychic medium online. I can't think of her name now. And she did not know me. I had never published this particular story about Tammy. Nobody knew about my past relationship from my high school days. And she was seeing people out of my past as she was reading me. It was online. She was reading me. Phone call or I think it was a Skype conversation. And she said, there's a young woman I'm picking up. And she said, maybe, she said, somebody that died that was in your life, been gone for 16, 17, 18 years, something like that. It was the date back to the 1991 date again. And she said, she's very dark. She says, I'm seeing her face, and her eyes are hollowed out. They're there. She said, it's not like demonic missing. She's just very hollowed out, very gaunt. And she's very sad. And she's extremely sad. And she said, but she's dark. And it's this dark presence in your life. She's here. She's there now. And she said, she says to me that you were the love of her life. And I said, I think I know exactly who you're talking about. But you hear stuff like that. And I say, is there anything I can do for her? She said she had scraggly hair and all of this. And I later found one picture of Tammy from my old yearbook, and I sent that to her, and she said, "I think that's the person I saw." She said she was much more gaunt, though. Um, and I didn't burn sage at that time, Jama, no. Um, so all these things were I would get these stories from people, and I remember when I moved out of the big house where all these things took place with the graffiti room, with the fireplaces, with all the activity in that house, the drawers and the vanities, the Tammy Barnhart issue. I had a young woman that I had that was a friend of mine that would come with some of the other belly dancers, and she went back to my bedroom to change clothes because she worked out or something, and I had a bunch of people in the house, and she went back to change clothes. And later that night, she told me, back in that bedroom, this is the bedroom where I got the big thump on the floor, and where I think Tammy was between Rainey and I, and where we picked up Tammy on the pendulum. Just before that, and this friend of mine went in the bedroom to change, and she came out and she said, "So I got to tell you something." She said, "There was like," she said, "I can only describe it." And she's kind of laughing nervously. She's like a demonic figure. She said, "He was standing, leaning on," and I had this big old 100-year-old buffet, like a dining room buffet, antique that I used as my dresser drawers in my bedroom. And I had that because I had this double wide room that I had put sideways, and it kind of as a room divider a bit. And I had stuff on there and all my clothes in there. And she said he was leaning on the buffet on one elbow, and she had this gruesome face. And she told me this. So this is another one of those things that happened along the way before that reading. But then when I finally moved out of that house, I remember closing up all the doors, and I was closing the garage door for the last time. I had pulled everything out, and it was manual, and I'm old garage, and I'm pulling it down. I'm holding it like this, and I look into the garage and I say, "Whoever is here in this house," I said, "you can't come with us." I said, "You got to stay here." I said, "You don't even necessarily have to stay here. You just can't come along." And I said, "I got to say goodbye to you, whoever you are. No malice, but stay. Don't follow us." And I shut the door, and we moved on. And so this other reading of the very gaunt woman came a few years even after that. And so there was all this activity with this particular person, this Tammy Barnhart. Now, I haven't sought her. I haven't looked for her. I haven't called her out. Now, I have been told by a good psychic friend of mine, medium Sarah Soderlin, who we've mentioned before. She was on the sit room with Rocky and I. And a night I was gone, so Rocky had her on. And she told me that sometimes you summon these things. She told me about a month, 6 weeks ago, she said, "Scotty, you've got somebody that's trying to make contact with you right now." And I told this story, and I don't remember where I told it, probably on the Situation Room one night a while back. But this was only about 6 weeks ago, and she said, "You're summoning somebody, you're conjuring somebody." I said, "I haven't done any such thing." I said, "I haven't even gone investigating any kind of paranormal stuff of late." And she said, "You're conjuring somebody." She said, "Do you know by speaking their name, by telling the story," which just occurred to me, that's what I'm doing tonight. Uh, she said, "You can summon them. You can bring them in close to you." And she said, you may have seen things happening, little things, stuff like that. She said, "You are summoning somebody." And the only thing I had in mind at that time was, and this is where I brought it up, if you remember when I posted those pictures from Egypt with the arm and the shoulder that were protruding, and I had some questions about that, and I told that story about what happened to me at Senenmut's tomb, and all that paranormal stuff, and all the different information that was coming to me from different, very metaphysical types of things. And she said, "You're summoning him. He hears you, and so respond to him." And so that was very 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 interesting. Let's see. Yep, I got a video of her in orb form from Flynn out the closet where she is. You're not talking about my stuff there, I think. If I go back up, you're probably talking about something else there. So, all of this about Tammy, I don't know where she is now, what's going on, but, it brings up that whole bittersweet memory. And somebody that says they've been with you for when Kay did the pendulum reading 13 years. And it seemed to fit the bill. And so that is one of the things. That long story, it's sometimes there are a dozen other stories in between all of that took place in that house and other houses. They say that spirits will try to get your attention. If you hear things in your house, that could be a natural occurrence, weather, shifting of the house, anything. There could also be some things, and there's ways to tell the difference when they're happening, where something or somebody is trying to get your attention. And I've had that happen all before this incident, the year before this incident with Tammy, and that pendulum reading, and the little boy showing up in my house at the same time, and all of these other things that happened. The year prior to that, I'd had several incidents take place. Prior to being in that house, I lived in that townhome, and prior to that, just after the divorce, I was in an upstairs duplex of an old house. And when my daughters would come and visit on the weekends when they were 9 years old, and my son was a year old. And I remember there were a couple of different things. I had this old do you remember the old series from the 60s, Lost in Space? They've done the remakes on Netflix now, and there was a remake movie about, God, almost 20 years ago now. But the original with the robot, Danger, Danger, Will Robinson. My sensors indicate an intruder is present. Now, you remember that one. Yes, Will Robinson, Leslie says. Now, I had a little collector's version of that robot, and he got broken. He's over there in the drawer, as a matter of fact. But he had a sensor on him that was set up that if you passed your hand or walked in front of him, he'd say, Danger, Will Robinson. Or he would say, my sensors indicate an intruder is present. And so it was fun. So we had this old wooden staircase that would come up from the main door of the old duplex to our upstairs duplex where we lived. And there was a little landing with a little triangular shelf in the corner as you turn and go up 5 more steps to my door. And everything was all the old woodwork and the railings and the doors and the steps. And it was a neat old house. And on that little shelf, just for fun, I put the little Lost in Space robot. So whenever we would come up the stairs and our heads got high enough to break the line of the sensor light for that robot, he would say something like, my sensors indicate an intruder is present. And we'd say, hey, robot. And we go in the house. So now, I had that sitting outside my door. If you open my front door, there was about a 2-foot landing right in front of the door, and then 4 or 5 steps down to that landing where the robot sat. Then it would turn right and go down about 15 steps to the bottom. And so I'm sitting in right inside that door. If you turned to the right was my bedroom. We were all wood floors. There was a big long hallway that curved at the end, and my daughter's room was there where they slept at the end of the hall. The kitchen was down there. The living room was off to the side. My big bedroom, I had a huge bedroom, was off to the front of the house, right inside that front door. And so I had a little desk set up in there. I had the big king size bed, and I had lots of room in there on the wood floor. So I used that as my office to do things. And I was sitting on my computer late one night. It was between 1 and 3 in the morning. And I probably knew the time at one point, but I've forgotten it now. But I'm sitting late at night on not this computer, but my laptop, and I was typing away on something, and I heard a sound that was like this. Let's see if I can mimic it on my desktop. Nope, not enough sound here. Heard the sound of, those little plastic balls, and I brought this up very recently. Those little plastic balls that you can get to put mice or rats in, and they exercise themselves, or hamsters or gerbils, and they roll around on the floor with these balls. Well, we had a pet rat that my daughters had that was curiously, I went out a few times with an attorney. She was one of the prosecutors for the city of Minneapolis, and we went on a few dates and hung out a little bit. And she had this beautiful blue rat. It was, I think they're called blues, very rare. And she gave one to my daughters. And so we had this rat. And so they'd put the rat in the ball, and the rat would walk around the house in this ball, roll down the wood floors. Well, here I am at about 1 a.m, and I hear this ball rolling down the hall, and my door was open, and it would open toward my desk. And if it was hanging open, I'd have to, it wasn't all the way to the wall, but I could just barely see out the door frame. And I heard this ball come rolling down the hall. Now, my daughters had been sleeping for several hours, and this ball, I saw it come through the door, rolling on the floor, and it stopped the way those things do. It stopped, and it kind of rolled a little bit and turned just a tear, and it stopped right in front of my desk. And there's no animal in it. I get up and I look down the hall. Lights are out. I look at the ball, and I walk down the hall. I peek into my daughter's room. They're both sleeping, sound asleep. My son was sleeping. And I walk back into my bedroom, and I look at that ball, and I go, huh, that's peculiar. And as I say that, outside my front door, where the Lost in Space robot is sitting on the landing now, middle of the night, late, it's between 1 and 3 a.m., like I said, I start hearing, "Danger, Will Robinson! Danger, Will Robinson! My sensors indicate an intruder is present. My sensors indicate an intruder is present. My sensors indicate an intruder is present. My sensors indicate an intruder is present." And it did this several times. I'm like, what the fuck? And I lean down, I pick up the ball, and that robot's still going off. I unlock the door, I open the door, and I walk down the landing, and he stops. Wave my hand in front of it, nothing. So I turned him off, and I went back up. Now, nothing else happened that night, but that little incident is something that started leading up to, these are the things that I believe you can explain them away. I'm sure, there was loose wiring in the robot. Oh, the girls left the ball out. Maybe a draft hit it and it rolled down the, you can think of all the excuses or all the explanations. The problem is timing, coincidence, if you will, which I don't believe in. Timing, and the ball is there. All of a sudden, the robot starts going off. All of that. Now, this is leading up, and I would get all kinds of things like that that would constantly happen. That would be indicators that something might be trying to get my attention. All kinds of stuff I've forgotten. So many things happened. I'm sure I've forgotten a bucket full. Now, there was one I wanted to tell you about that was in the same house with the Tammy experience. The Tammy experience had not happened yet. And I am sitting in, and this is where Kay had said that she felt the presence of a jealous woman in the house. I had a young woman from the festival on a Saturday morning called up and said, "Need some company?" I said, "Sure, come on over." And I said, "I'll brew coffee." And we sat, remember I mentioned my office is in that breezeway. I had this huge 6-foot long oak desk. And so we sat there at the desk. We're having coffee and we're talking. She got there mid-morning on a Saturday. And we ended up sitting there all day. talking about different stuff, talking about books, talking about tarot, talking about all different kinds of things. Now, mind you, I'm going to say this because it's an essential part of the story. Nothing happened between us. There was no sex. There was no nothing like that. And that's an essential part of the story. And you'll hear why in a second. No clothes came off. So none of that kind of thing. There was no hanky panky going on. We were just friends and we were just talking. She had long red hair, went all the way down to her butt. And so through the course of the day, we're talking, we're drinking coffee most of the day. And it's winter time, so the days are shorter. We notice it's already dark outside. So she'd been there all day long, 8 or 9 hours. And there was a point where I said, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. I got up. Now I had this long living room, and you've heard me tell the story of Rainey when she was in the shower. Maybe you have, if you've heard it, where she saw the drawers open and shut. Well, there's that long living room with the archway, and you'd turn and you'd go to the master bath. Well, if you went through the kitchen, there was a little room that was one of the old dining rooms. So it had a door on the kitchen side. It had a door on the other side of the room that led you to that back area to the master bedroom and master bath. And that was my son's bedroom. Now, my little boy, who at the time was 3 or 4 years old. And now, no, none of the kids were home. This was one of those weekends their mom took them. There were a lot of things that happened on weekends that they were gone, by the way. And so I passed through the kitchen to go to the bathroom. Been sitting with this woman, talking all day. Passed through the kitchen. I get into Sam's bedroom. I go through the kitchen door to his bedroom, the old dining room, which is his bedroom now. And about halfway through his room, before I hit the door to the back hallway to my master bedroom and my master bath, I hit this, and it was I was very cognitive of this. Like I walked into a wall of cold. And I'm like, oh. And I was conscious of it at the time. Wow. What have I just walked into? I felt like I walked into a cold front, but it was like a wall. Right halfway through my son's bedroom is where it hit me. And I walk back there and I go into the bathroom and I do my quick business in the bathroom. But here's where it's interesting. As I'm standing there, doing what men do in front of a toilet, I reach down and you do the unzip and, you do, and I'm like, what is that? And I pull, there's a long hair inside my pants, and I pull on it, and it's a long red hair. It's about this long. Remember I said she had red hair down to her butt? But it was wrapped, twined around my junk. And I pulled on that. At first I went, whoa, what is it? And it's unraveling. And I go, no, you have got to fucking be kidding me. I pulled it off. Of course, it's all like this because it unraveled. And I remember looking and I go, I just talked to the room and I go, well, that's kind of funny. But this is one of those things that I was told there was a jealous woman in the house who was trying to get my attention. And this was one of those things that she did to get my attention. And so now nothing happened with this person. She went home that night and so on. But I would find myself going back there. The bathroom and the master bedroom seemed to be the focal point for all activity like this. And I once again talked to the room, to the house, and I said, look, you can be here. I said, all I'm going to tell you is don't scare my children. I said, if you can share this house with me, I don't care. Unless you start doing stupid shit. If you're evil, I'm going to have you exorcised out of the house. I said, if you're just in the space and you can tolerate me, I'll tolerate you. But if you scare my children, I swear to God, I will have you removed. And so nothing, my kids never experienced anything in that house. Now, they'll tell me they got a few things going on, but that was another one of those experiences. A couple of more things I want to tell you about before we end this. And one of them is something I haven't told you. One of them might be, I just want to play to break up the monotony of just hearing me talk. I don't have the facility to play this into the stream, but I'm going to play it on my computer, and hopefully you can pick it up. Remember, Rocky and I have talked about the Big Bang, and if he were here, I'd have him. If we were doing this on our show, one of these days we'll do. I think we did this on his show once. So, do you remember Rocky? And we told you this story. Rocky and John Ward and I, we went to this little old house in South Minneapolis, one of the oldest houses in the area. Built in the 1850s, said it was built by French Canadians, that it was a stopover house from the old Fort Snelling, which was about 20 miles away by car, 15 to 20 miles, which meant about a day's march back in the 1800s. As you'd go out west to the frontier, this was one of the stopping points early on, the first night. And it was a roadhouse or a whorehouse as well. And the woman who owned this house had grown up in the house, and she was a member, still is, I think, of the Minneapolis City Council. So she's a credible person. She's a business person, but she had all this activity, and she met Rocky. She invited Rocky to come, and she spent a lot of time in that house, investigating that house. He's got all kinds of recordings, all kinds of evidence. So John and I went over with him, and you may have heard this story before. Where we got the Big Bang. We're down in the basement, and I've got a clip here I'm going to play where you hear, and hopefully it's clear enough that it's not just a waste of my time and yours to try this. It's a little hard to hear anyway. Some of the things in the video or in the recording, but you will hear Rocky had a little spirit box, and so you hear some blipping and voices on the spirit box. And we're sitting down in the basement, and we heard this big crash, as if something had fallen on the wood floors upstairs from us, on the main floor of the house. But the house was empty. There was nothing in it. They'd been painting and fixing it up to sell the house. There was nothing there. And we got this big bang that shook the house, and we could find nothing that could have caused it. At the same time, we got some EVPs. We got a huffing noise that in stereo on the recorder went from one side to the other. It sounded like a dog huffing or a man out of breath. And then he welcomes us. And we didn't hear any of this audibly. It was only on the recording. So I'm going to try to play this for you now, if you haven't heard this. Hey, Joyce, how you doing? And let me go over here, and we'll give this a shot. I'm going to move my mic, so hopefully you'll be able to hear it. I'm going to tip this down so you catch it on the speaker. And hopefully now you'll be able to hear this. Okay, here we go. This is that bang and the huffing. Listen for it.
What tipped over? Hello, thank you for the sound. What was that?
Listen here.
Hello? Hello, is anyone here? Welcome. Hey, thank you. Thank you for the sign.
All right.
What was that?
Now, I'm going to tell you something here. I'll play that again for you in a second here. But what you heard there was, I don't know how well you heard that. If you could hear that, it was a pretty amazing thing that happened to us. Rocky still maintains that this is the spookiest thing that ever happened to him. And so what you got is the spirit box at the beginning. You hear the big bang. And I stand up. I'm sitting on the stairway. I go, hello. I go upstairs. And we go running up the stairs. John Ward utters his famous line, "Get me out of this fucking house," you'll hear him say with his British accent. And then we're looking around. We don't hear anything back. I'm saying, is anybody here? Because we wanted to pick up on a recorder. John, by the way, this was on John's recorder, and it was also on Rocky's, but we left those upstairs recording. So it was right up there where the sound took place. And then you hear this huffing. It goes, welcome. Just like that, you'll hear that. Now I'm going to play it for you one more time so you can hear that. So let me move my mic. This is so untechnical, but they couldn't even do this 100 years ago. So it's as technical as I get tonight. All right. Let's do this again. Here we go. Now listen to this very closely, and you can hear everything. And if you watch my picture, I can kind of point out where things are happening. Here we go. That's the talking on the spirit box. John Ward.
Hello, thank you for the sound. What was that? Hello, is anyone here? Hey, thank you for the sign.
There you go. Then John Ward just goes over and grabs his recorder and shuts it off because we didn't hear anything audibly. This was all on this was all later when we picked this up on the recording. So if you heard that well, you got the idea of what we were hearing. We heard that big bang. We looked all over for something, and there was nothing. Drawers. And mind you, let me throw in this caveat. None of us are rubes. We've been here before. We know what to look for. We're not like, oh my God, oh, that must be my dead grandma. You know, it's nothing like that. We knew what the hell we were doing. And we got up there, and my initial reaction was, hello, run to it. It's upstairs. John was like, get me out of this fucking house. Rocky, in another recording, I don't know if you could hear it in this one. He was like, shit, wait, because we left him sitting in the basement as we're running up the steps. And we get up in that kitchen and we look around. Then we get the huffing and we get the welcome. Now, that same night there, Rocky got a ton of other stuff in that house. I think over 27 EVPs that night he picked up. Now, there's another one from that same night that I want to play you. And Leslie, I saw you said something about the Faribault and all of that. I don't have any of those here other than just videos stashed away, and I don't have any sound bites pulled out. But I thought these two sound bites would be interesting. Now, let me set the stage. This is a little earlier than the first one. This is about 8:30 at night. We've got the lights on. We don't need to do this in the dark. And John was picking up. He had his these are mine. He had a pair made for me just like his. I think I've shown you these. He had his dowsing rods. And these are made out of cast metal by a guy in Luxor, an artisan in Luxor made these, an Egyptian guy. John had these made for me. And he had his set just like this. And he's picking up all different kinds of personalities, all different kinds of answers, things. And he picks things up too. John's very into the esoteric side of these things. So we're standing out there, and John said, well, you know, this was a brothel, a whore house. And this is the house in South Minneapolis, same house. And he said, I can see in my mind's eye, and we're kind of laughing about it. We're being a little locker roomish because we're guys. John says, I can see her right there, woman in a red dress. This was a bedroom. She's riding this guy, and she's riding him. And I said, oh, she's riding him, eh? You know, we're doing this. And we're kind of joking around. And Rocky's in another part of the house. And this recorder was on a tripod, the triangulating stereo recorder. And it's about 15, 20 feet from where we are. But there's nothing in the house. And there's a couple of things that happen here. Right at the very beginning, when you hear us talking about riding, you'll hear, and it's right at the beginning, you'll hear somebody shushing me or shushing John. Shh, 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 it says over us. And you'll hear that. And then toward the end, you hear two voices that play. And these two voices are neither John nor I. And they're both in a foreign language. The first one we can't make out. We still haven't made out. It's got a cadence like this. It says something like, Hesse or Iceland? And we still don't know what it's saying. We've sent it to some people who thought they knew, some linguists. They can't make out what it is. And somebody answers in French, Mandu, which means my God. And then he does the French thing, at the end, Mandu. And the interesting thing about this is, if you remember, I tell you, this house was built in the 1850s by French-Canadian settlers. And so now I'm going to play this for you. So I'm going to move the mic back over there, and I'm going to have you listen to this and see what you think. All right? You get that positioned over the microphone or the speaker. Let's go back over here. Now let me play this one for you. This sounds like, now you'll hear John Ward and I laughing about riding, whores, stuff like that. And you hear almost right away, the first few seconds, the shushing over us. And then the voices come toward the end. I'll watch me and I'll kind of indicate. So
if you shoot a rider, I can get it and see if I can do the riding. I'm kind of real, Iceland.
I'm happier, Iceland. Mandu. That's what it sounds like. So let me play that again. You hear the shushing at the beginning, and then you hear John and I talking, and you hear these two voices. Here we go.
So, if you shoot a rider, I can get it and see if I can do the riding. I'm kind of real, Iceland.
Two different voices. Not either of us. I'm going to do that one more time because it's short, so you can hear the language. Here we go again, one more time. The shushing is almost right away.
So, if you shoot a rider, I can get it and see if I can do the riding. I'm kind of real, Iceland.
There you go. So, that was the other one that I have on my recorder from that night. Now, as Michelle just said, Mandu means my God. That's all we knew. We couldn't make out the other one, but it said my God, and it had the little French. And those of you who speak French, Michelle, French people they've got the little sometimes at the end of what they say. Mandu, Mandu, that kind of a thing. So that's what we picked up. Now, that's a couple of EVPs from that house. And that's what Rocky and John and I experienced together. We also have all the stuff from Faribault, but there's a lot more to it than that. Now, I might, by the way, just so you know, I may repeat some of these stories when I'm doing my show over on the network, because we're going to have a much bigger audience. Not going to do them, the first night. But when I talk about paranormal stuff, which is predominantly what I'll be doing on that show, I'll repeat some of this. So if you've heard them before, come and join us anyway and support. But hopefully we'll have start building a much bigger audience. And once I feel that audience is big enough and I can share those stories to a new part of the audience, we'll probably do some of that. Now, there was another story I wanted to get into, and it's a little darker and a little deeper. It's not the Sennenmut story. Give me a second here. Why did I thought I want to tell that one when I'm done playing the audio clips. And I'm trying to think of what it was. I know I told you all at one point or another. Oh, I know what it is. Now I remember. This is when we owned the ranch house. Now, Rainey and I had a 40-acre horse ranch back in 2008 to 2010. And we had an old ranch house there that was about 100 years old. And we had some experiences in that house. Not a lot because we didn't push it in that house, but we had things that happened there. And this is one that it's a little darker and probably a little spookier even still for me. And we had a little fire in the house. The old rancher was out there and he had a bunch of his horses out on our land still. Guy we were buying the house from, the land from. And he kept some horses out. And in the wintertime, he was old fashioned. He'd hook up the garden hose. And all through the winter, he would still use that garden hose to water the tanks down at the barn. He had, 100 feet of garden hose. And he would lay them out so they would drain. But sometimes he would forget to turn the spigot off, not to the outside, but the inside spigot. And it would freeze up the pipe a little bit. And he took one day a blowtorch to it to warm it up. We were gone for the day. And to warm it up. And what he had done was, this was an old Dutch colonial house. So if you're looking at the front, think of the Amityville house almost, without the windows. Had one of those barn-shaped roofs on it, the whole front facade and the shape of the house. And so the hose were hooked up right at the bottom, go right down the middle of the house, right at the bottom on the ground. And so he warmed that up. But what he did was he warmed the pipe up so much that it got red hot on the inside and he didn't know it. And it started igniting the old wood up the inside of the wall. So we come back home mid-afternoon and he's pulling out with his truck and we wave to each other. And I go and I open up the front door and smoke billows out. So, of course, little panic ensues. We go get the animals and we don't see any fire. And we call the fire department. They isolate, they put it out. It burned out a big hole in the front wall of the house. And so we had that fixed. But now, that following week, everybody's out of the house. I sent my kids, my twin daughters who were seniors in high school, and their young brother, who was, I think, in kindergarten at the time. No, maybe a little older than that. Doesn't matter. They were little kids. They were kids. Sent them off to school. And I went and I sent them to their moms for the week. I asked her if she'd take them because I didn't want the kids living in that house before it had been cleaned up, all the smoke out, smoke smell, all that stuff. So I'm staying at the house and there was still a bit of a haze in the air. Now, this is a little longer story and I'll try to wrap this up soon, though. It's a more involved story. Let's put it that way. I'm in the house and it's dark. I have the little lamp in the corner, with the old kind of orangey lampshade on it. And so the light looked yellowy and orangey and stuff like that. And there was still, you could see barely a bit of haze in the air. And I get a call from a good friend of mine. You may know her, April Slaughter. And she was doing readings with Frank's Box, if you know what those are. Mind you, this is back in 2009 when this happened. So we're talking, it's almost 10 years. It's 10 years ago. And so she calls me on the phone and she says, Scotty, I was doing some box readings tonight. And she said, out of the blue, your name came out of the voice gave me your name. It said, call Scotty. And she says, what, call Scotty Roberts? And the voice said, yes. And she said, I don't know how she received the voices off the box, but it said, tell him to call. Chris Moon, to call Moon. They were simple messages. Now, at the time, lest you think as I tell this story that there is some setup in here, April and Chris were not talking at that time. They were a bit on the outs with each other, professionally and on some other issues that is not my business to share. And so they weren't talking. But she said, I got a message that said, call Scotty, tell him to call Chris Moon, coming out of this box. And I said, that's strange. And she said, you got to know. She said, Scotty, I'm not pulling your leg. Why would I tell you to call Chris Moon? I said, you're right. So I call up Chris Moon. And I said, Chris, I said, Scotty, how you doing? And the message was to have Chris Moon do a box reading for me on his box. Why it wasn't doing it through April's, it was telling April to tell me to call Chris Moon. Those two are on the outs with each other. They both do box readings, to call him to get a box reading. Why didn't it just tell Chris Moon's box? So I call Chris and I tell him April called me. And I said, April told me her box told me to call you. And of course, we're guys, so we laughed about that for a little bit. And April's hot and all of that. So blah, blah, blah. We're guys, just like the writing thing and all of that. So Chris said, so April's box told you to call me and have me do a box reading for you. I said, yes. He said, that's crazy. He says, okay. He says, give me about a half an hour, I'll call you back. So he calls me back. And he says, okay, got a reading for you. Let's set it up. And he sets it up and we're on the phone and I can hear it going in the background. I can hear the voice coming through. And there was a bunch of stuff he gave me. I'm not going to tell you. There was messages for me about some other things that were going on. And then the box says something like, I would be getting a visitation that night. Be prepared for a visitation. I hear the voice coming out of the box over the phone. And I'm like, what did that say? And Chris said, you heard it. You're going to get a visitation tonight. He said, I don't know what that means, he says, but be prepared. Okay, so I thank him and we hang up. And now it's about midnight, 12:30, and I'm standing alone in the ranch house on 40 acres out in the middle of godforsaken nowhere in the country. And it's hazy in the house and the small lights are on. And I said, if anybody wants to talk to me, I guess you could do it now. I said, I'm a little freaked out. And trust me, folks, I was genuinely freaked out by this. And so I said, okay. I said, I'm going to go to bed. There you go. If you want to talk to me, don't hover over my sheets. If somebody wants to talk to me, I'll pee my bed for sure. That's been my line all through my life now. So I went to bed. And it was about 12:30. I went to bed. No, it was midnight because I woke up on the hour. All through the night, something woke me up. And I slept with the light on that night, by the way. And 1 o'clock came. I'm awake. I sit up. It's quiet. I walk out in the main room. Have anybody got anything for me? Nobody? Okay. Going back to bed. Went back to bed. 2 o'clock. I'm awake. I'm like, God, wasn't I just awake an hour ago? Did the same thing, nothing. Went back to sleep. 3 o'clock. I'm awake. Every fucking hour on the hour, I swear to you people, I woke up. All the way until 5 in the morning. And at 5 in the morning, I do not know to this day if I actually saw this physically or if I dreamt it, if my the psychological thing was so burning in me that it created images in my dream state. But at 5 o'clock, I wake up. I see two little girls standing at the foot of my bed in the dark. And I had a light on the nightstand, so there was light in the room. But these two little girls were both blonde. One was a little older than the other. They looked, in my memory, to be 4 or 5 and 6 or 7. They both had long hair, and it was scraggly, like it had not been combed out for months. They were wearing what looked like gray sleeveless shifts, formless, shapeless shifts, like almost like taking a potato sack, cutting a hole in it for the head and for the arms, putting it on. And they had, for belts, they had ropes around their waist. And I remember seeing all this, and it was all very dingy. And I saw this. I thought I was already sitting up in bed. And I was like, boom. And then I'm awake fully, and there's nothing there. And I said, oh, okay. If that's the extent of the visitation, I'm okay with it. I don't get it, but there it is. And so, needless to say, I didn't go back to bed that night. Well, my daughter's mother, that morning, about 2 hours later, 7:30, drove them by the house. They had to stop, pick up schoolwork they had left at the house. And both of my daughters, Abby and Bryn, they were, I believe this was their junior year or senior year. And they both said to me, Dad, or no, Bryn says to me, Dad, I had this dream last night I got to tell you about. And Abby says to me, so did I. But we got to run to school. We'll tell you a little later. So now, because the house, we can't live in it right now, and I'm staying there, and they're at their mom's. A couple of days go by. I talk to them every day, but we didn't talk about it for a couple of weeks, if I remember right. And we're sitting in the car in the barnyard one afternoon. And I said to Bryn, I said, didn't you say, oh, I told them a little bit about this dream. And I said, or not dream, this vision, whatever it was, visitation of the two little girls. Bryn said, oh my God, Dad, I didn't tell you about my dream that same night. And Bryn starts telling me about this dream, and she starts to cry. And she said, Dad, now the basement in this ranch house wasn't like a haunted house basement. It was just a dingy basement. Concrete had been poured. There were frames for a wall down there that had never been put up. And, but it always had a feeling, before Rainey and I moved in there, we took some people out and we did some EVPs and stuff, and we got voices down in the basement. That's another part of this, but so it has nothing to do with what actually happened here. But Bryn said she had this dream, and Sam, the little brother, who was 3 years old, I think, at the time. No. Hold on. How old was he? I'm just trying to get my timing right. I think he was, he was 5 years old. He was in kindergarten. And so Bryn said, in my dream, Sam went down into the basement and into the back room and in the back part of the basement. And she said, so I followed him in my dream down into the basement. And she said, I look and he's all the way in the corner. I'm getting chills telling you this. He's all the way in the corner with his back in the corner. And in between me and Sam, she said there was this, looked like, all I can describe as a big demon. She said, I don't even know how to describe it. And it was blocking Sam from leaving the basement. And she said, I worked my way around and I reached around it and I grabbed Sam by the hand and said, come with me. And she said, I grabbed Sam and we ran out of the basement and up the stairs. And she said, and I got to and the stairs coming up from the basement there was a landing there. It came up and there was a landing in this back entryway we had decorations all over the walls, and then up another couple of steps. And you were at the back door. And she said, I came up and I was on the landing and I looked back down, and she said, folks, God honest truth, my daughter said, a little girl walked out of the back room. She had scraggly blonde hair and she was wearing like what looked like a burlap shift with a rope belt. And she looked up at me and said, I only wanted to play with Sam. And she said she woke up. And by this time, it makes me cry thinking of my daughter crying. My daughter's bawling, telling me this story in the car. And I said, holy shit. And that was my first reaction. And then Abby said, Dad, my dream the same night involved Sam as well. She said, I went upstairs. I was going up the stairs to Sam's bedroom on the second floor. And she said there was a man standing in his open doorway. And she said, an almost elegant looking man, think late 19th century, with the long coat with the tails kind of gray. She said, and he had long brown hair that was parted, but it was long down to his shoulders, just hanging straight, not pulled back. A white shirt that was open, and it was like the tight pants with the riding boots type of thing. Look, think any Jane Austen book adapted to a movie, and you get the idea. And she said the only thing was, she said, he had no eyes. His eyes were hollowed out and black. And he looked directly at me in the dream as I was walking to Sam's bedroom, and he said, this one is mine. And she said, and I woke up crying. And so my two little girls told me, now, something I had learned was that demonics will present themselves sometimes in human form. And when they do that, generally they're missing something, a limb, something or other. Sometimes it's the eyes are blackened out. There's no eyeballs. And so I talked to some good friends of mine after this in this field. And I ended up just taking some things, a cross I wore around my neck that was given to me by somebody that we did a little backtracking on it and found out this person, trust me. And he told me, go throw that into the river, moving body of water, which I did. Bloop, and it was gone. Now, nothing came of these dreams, of the vision with the little girls, of both my daughter's dreams with the similar character in it, that I know of. I couldn't tell you what that meant and what it was pointing to, but we did some cleansing after that of the house, of ourselves. I did have in that house with my daughter Bryn the contact through a spirit box with my aunt who had passed away in 95, and this is 10 years ago, same year. And she spoke to us on the box, and it was very moving. Keep in mind, when you use these spirit boxes, there's no microphone, so you can't broadcast to anybody. We were on our ranch in the middle of nowhere, 40 acres in the country, 10 o'clock at night, and we're speaking, and I said, is there anybody here in the house that would like to talk to us? This was before the fire, if I remember right. And a voice came back and said, this is Andy. And my aunt was Andrea. Andy, we called her. And I said, Andy? Yes. The voice said, now, if you know these spirit boxes, it will spin on a frequency and you'll hear some of the bloop, 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 bloop of radio sounds and things. This was so different. It was like the voice was floating over the moving frequency. Yes, it said. I said, my aunt? Yes. And the answers were coming right on the tail of me saying things. And we talked a little bit. I asked a couple of questions. And then the voice said something to me. My mom is Jane, is her name. Her sister, my aunt's sister. And this voice said, where is Janie? Just like that. And I said, you mean my mom? Janie? Yes. And I said, well, she's in Arizona. Oh, that's right. That's what the voice said. And then my daughter, 16, she said, she was 3 when my aunt died. And she said, do you remember who I am? And the voice said, yes, you're pretty now. Just like that, coming out of this box. And I recorded all of this. I had it running through the computer to record it. But I have since that recording has disappeared. I think it was on a disc that went bad or something. But maybe it'll turn up one of these days. But after a while of asking questions, it got quieter and quieter. And I said, I'm going to sign off then. Because you might not be there anymore. I'm going to sign off. And the voice said, good night. Just like that. Now, not long after that, during Halloween time, when all the news stations do their stories, a news station from Austin, Minnesota, got wind that I should be somebody they should talk to about stuff. And they came out to my house with a cameraman and a camera, and we did the same little experiment in broad daylight. And they caught it on recording. It was the same damn voice. I don't remember what was said, but they played it on their news broadcast that night. And the reporter, she, young, pretty thing, she was mortified that we picked up this voice. And it wasn't threatening at all. The voice said something like, hello. I always do that to my wife or my kids when they wake up because of the movie It. Hello. So the voice was it was the same voice. It said hello. And it said a couple of things, and but they caught it all on tape. One of these days I'll have to pick that up. So now I've had a ton of experiences from here to Egypt, in England, in Scotland, different places I've been, all the different houses I've lived in. Rainey and I have had a lot of things happen. I'll have to tell you about my Ouija board experience with my first wife way back in about the time I started reading tarot, way back in the early 1980s to mid 1980s. And we'll do this another time. I'll tell some stories. Maybe we'll do a weekly paranormal thing. But of course, I'm going to be starting my own radio program on Odyssey in 10 days. So we'll probably make a night of the week. Well, we're going to do more paranormal on that show than anything else. So paranormal talk, Star Trek talk. Odyssey was formed around doing these kinds of shows. So I'm going to be doing all of those. I'm going to be doing some pretty heavy-handed paranormal or metaphysical shows with some guests. And we're going to talk about some stuff on that show. So I'll give you a little more detail as we get a little closer now. But that's coming up on the 19th, Monday. If you would like a tarot reading, I put the link in my page, but let me type it out here for you. There are tarot readings. I don't have a special going right now, but if you would like to get one, you just go to this link. Let's see, it's .com/tarot.html. That's my old site. So just go there to that link. You can you pay for a reading, choose your reading, then contact me and we'll line up a time for it. I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you who were here tonight. That you would listen to me drone on for an hour and 45 minutes means a lot to me. I appreciate that you would take your time to be here. And so in 15 minutes, Rocky Stucci and I on the Situation Room, I hope you were sufficiently creeped out in the creeped out places, sufficiently moved in the moving places, and sufficiently unindoctrinated from what you might believe about these things to say, there's something to this stuff. I hope you find me credible enough to relay a story like this and have you not go, oh, he's such a big faker. These are things that happen to me. I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to tell it like a story, but I promise you one thing. I have not embellished details. I'm telling you as they happen. I just like to create the visual with words so you can see it and hopefully feel it and enjoy it and maybe get something out of it. If I didn't say hello to you tonight, thanks for being here. I know, Michelle, I saw you came in later. Everybody who is here, thank you for being here. VJB, I didn't see you earlier. Welcome. Fran, nice to see you. Thank you. And Brianna, thank you. Everybody who's here, thank you. And if you want to help support me, I don't have a donate button. Go pick up a tarot reading. That helps me. Go pick up some of my shirts and my designs from Son of a Patriot. The link is here in the video. Like this video on your way out. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. Spread the word. And I'll see you again. Hopefully, rapscallions, the consequential rapscallions I do declare with Jeffrey Doughty tomorrow night. If that doesn't happen, I'll still be right here. And I'll see you here anyway. So either way, tomorrow night, little less than 15 minutes. Rocky Stucci and me on the Situation Room. See you there. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your time. And I'll see you soon.